The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hello, I'm Seth Camillo.
And I am Caroline Risberg, and we are The Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are very, very lucky to have Dr. Mark Griffiths with us, the Distinguished Professor of Behavioral Addiction in the Psychology Department at Nottingham Trent University, and he's the Director of the International Gaming Research Unit. So he's coming to us from across the pond, and we really appreciate him giving us his time.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
So let's dive into it. So I'm going to ask you, why do you think the internet is so addictive?
The answer to this first question is probably going to surprise you, because I've actually argued that the internet is no more, people are no more addicted to the internet than alcoholics are addicted to bottles. It's about what people do on the internet rather than the internet itself. So, I've been studying internet addiction now since 1995. So, and in fact, I was the very first person in the world ever to publish an academic paper on internet addiction. And through the last however many years it is now, the decades that I've been looking into it, it's become quite clear to me is that people have addictions on the internet rather than to the internet. And it all depends on obviously how you define what addiction is. And I'm quite happy to go into how I define addiction in a minute. But for me, I've come across so many people who excessively use the internet, particularly gamers, who can be on for hours and hours each day, yet there is no negative detrimental consequences at all. And so even though they may be spending what other people perceive them to be addicted to being, gaming online, by my definition, they wouldn't be classed as an addict, particularly if there's, as I say, there's no negative detrimental consequences. One thing I always say is that addictions do not occur in a vacuum, and addictions are actually depends on the context. And what I mean by that, so one of my favorite papers that I published back in 2010, I actually compared two case studies. Okay, one was a guy who was about 48 years old, and I compared him with another guy who was about 21 years old. And both of them were playing up to 14 hours a day, every single day on a particular online game. So one of them, so there was a guy, the 48-year-old guy, he was playing a game called EverQuest, and he was playing, let's say, up to 14 hours every day. He was actually getting his wife to phone into his job to say, "I'm really sorry, my husband can't come in today, he's ill." He wasn't ill. He was sitting and playing EverQuest all day, all day long. And his wife got to the point, she said, "If you don't stop playing this game, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to take our kids with you, take the kids with her." And that's exactly what happened. Their marriage broke down as a result of the fact that he could not do anything but play this game called EverQuest. And of course, after he split up with his wife, the only way he could cope with the fact that his wife had gone is just carry on playing EverQuest again and again and again, up to 14 hours every day. Now that quite clearly, to me, was somebody that, this game had completely taken over that person's life, that it was having severe negative detrimental effects. He lost his job, which probably doesn't surprise you because he was never turning up because he was playing the game. Now, I compared him with a 21-year-old guy who just left university, who at that point in his life had no partner, no children, had no job. Now, you might say the reason he's got no partner, no kids and no job is because he was playing a World of Warcraft, but that wasn't the case. He was voluntarily playing the game, and, he was lauded within the game. He was revered within the game. He met his now wife in the game, and he now works in the computer game industry. It was quite clear that, he was only playing this game when he had nothing else to do, when he got his first job, got his girlfriend, who's now his wife, is that his gaming, although it's still excessive, it certainly was, he wasn't spending from the moment he got up to when he went to bed on the game. Now, the point about those two case studies is that they were behaviorally identical. They were both, basically, from the time they got up to when they went to bed, playing all day, every day on the internet, playing this, in their cases, two different games, but playing all day, every day. But one of them I would class as being addicted to video games, and the other one I would class as not being addicted.
This actually speaks to what the show is about, which is, we're able to have an unhealthy relationship, maybe not addictive, but we're
Functional.
as a population, we're able to have that unhealthy relationship and still be able to function in ways like making wages and going to our jobs and whatnot, but still having an unhealthy relationship. I would say I am that type of person.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all contextual. I mean, I could not function without the internet now. I mean, I'm actually now, unfortunately, 3 years ago, I had an operation, a major spinal operation, which left me unable to walk and a loss of some functionality in my hands and arms.
Oh
My whole of my teaching now is done online. I work from home. I mean, I cannot function now without the internet. So my whole of my working life and most of my leisure life now is carried out online. So I'm a very, very excessive user, but it's quite clearly the internet for me, it's life affirming, life enhancing, actually makes my life a lot easier. You talked about unhealthy relationships. Well, of course, all behaviors are on a continuum from one end where absolutely no problems whatsoever through to pathological and addictive use on the other. But of course, what we're now seeing today in today's contemporary society, whether we're talking about smartphones, and my argument for smartphones is exactly the same. People are no more addicted to smartphones than alcoholics are addicted to bottles. It's the things that people do on their smartphones rather than the smartphone itself. Although having said that, I have come across people that do seem to have emotional relationships with their smartphone. So maybe there is some unhealthy use there. But the thing is, I think far more people are what I would call habitual users rather than unhealthy users. And the thing about habitual use is habitual use can still have some negative effects in people's lives, which you may classify as unhealthy, particularly in terms of work productivity or educational productivity, where people are quite clearly, they're doing their job, but they're not doing it to the maximum effectiveness. They're at college or university or at school, and because of their smartphone use, is that quite clear they're not doing as much homework as they should be, or not, engaging in their job as much as. So there's a loss of productivity depending on occupation or education, depending on what age you are. And that, if we multiply all the numbers of wasted hours that people should be in terms of educational learning or in terms of their occupation, that's a major negative detriment to society as a whole, and that quite clearly is caused by the fact that people spend so long scrolling through their social media feeds or doing whatever they do.
And can we speak about, if you don't mind, about your personal situation, which is the internet has allowed you to interact in a way you wouldn't have had, say 30, 40 years ago. You wouldn't have been able to teach classes online and given your injuries.
Now, it just happened that a year into COVID, I then went unfortunately, I had a spinal operation that left me unable to walk, which meant now all of my job is done online. But in fact, in a way, I'm kind of glad that COVID happened, because I had a year without being, not seeing my colleagues day in, day out. I was having to teach online, do my research online, do my consultancy online. And now, of course, that's exactly what I'm doing now. I mean, I don't feel disabled talking to you now. It's because the online world has made my life, as I say, the internet makes my job, my life enhancing, life affirming.
Yeah.
I'm totally reliant. I don't go shopping. I haven't been in a shop to buy anything physical, whether that's food or whether it's a DVD or a book. I do everything online now. So the internet quite clearly is such a fundamental part of my life, because I'm a disabled person now. Obviously, I don't like being disabled. And it's one of the reasons I work so much, because when you work, you just forget about being disabled. But the internet, I'm obviously a very heavy, excessive internet user. But for me, the internet is quite clearly something that just helps me get through life. So for me, there is a very distinct distinction between dependence and addiction. And I always tell my students this. So for me, I am totally dependent on internet and technology now for my day-to-day activity. I'm actually drug dependent. I take 8 different medications a day. Okay. I am quite clearly if I don't take those medications, I would not be able to function. But I'm not addicted to those medications. I'm not addicted to the internet. But I'm both dependent on the internet. I'm dependent on those medications to get me through every single day that I'm living on this planet. Okay, so You know,
Yeah.
people confuse the words dependence and addiction as if they're the same thing, but quite clearly they're not. We can be
Right.
dependent on something, and that dependence can be something, as I say, that's very, has very positive things in people's lives, and that's clearly where I am at the moment. I don't know what I would do now without the internet, because
Yeah.
I wouldn't have a job, and I wouldn't be able to function doing the things that I do day to day, because, as I say, I order my food shopping online.
Yeah.
The last 4 Christmases now, every single Christmas present I bought has been online. And I know that lots of people are doing that now anyway, but I have to do it because I don't have the luxury of being able to just go into a shop anymore. In fact, I just don't like being in my wheelchair. I'd rather, luckily in an average day, I'm only in my wheelchair 15 minutes, just to go to the toilet or make a cup of coffee. Because most of the time, unfortunately, I'm sedentary, I'm working, but the internet has meant that my life is a lot better to do that. I mean, I'm just so glad that I had a job where I can do almost everything online.
The title of our show is The Internet is Crack. And I think I do buy, it's not about buying or not buying. You're the academic, but the not classifying things as addiction, it's that makes sense to me, but it does, the excessive use part and the sort of winding its way into your life. I do, despite what you're saying, feel like that is a problem.
Yeah, I'm somebody that I don't problematize or pathologize the internet, mainly because my experiences of it are very, very positive. And most people I know and I work with, it's a very, very positive thing.
Right.
However, I think we can all realize is that the internet and things that are more important is things that people do on the internet have become they've become very pervasive. They're all encompassing, it's ubiquitous. Every part, there's hardly anything we can't do online now. Almost every activity, whether it's sex, whether it's, probably it's just eating is one of the, eating we can't do online, and we can buy things online.
We can order.
We can order.
It's quite clearly had an effect on things like obesity rates. And, we look
Right.
now in our country at all the Deliveroo, Uber, things coming to our house all the time now in terms of takeaway food. Online and the smartphone is, the apps that we have on the smartphone has just made that so much easier. But, your podcast, The Internet is Crack. I don't think the internet is crack as such, but I quite clearly think that things that people can do on the internet, for a small minority of people, quite clearly are addictive, and for a bigger proportion, they can be problematic and habitual. But I personally still think that the advantages of internet technology far outweighs the disadvantages, and that's why digital literacy is so important in schools now, and it is about educating people about the downsides that people can have by having engaging in too much smartphone use, too much internet use, but that's, as I say, but everything becomes normalized now. I mean, I'm still you won't believe this, but from December 2019 up until about 6 months ago, I actually lived without a smartphone. Okay?
Oh wow!
So nearly 5 years I lived without a smartphone, and the only reason I've got one now is because of online payments. My bank wants me to authenticate. It's me that's making the payments.
Yeah.
I didn't get a smartphone because I want to use the things on a smartphone. My bank has forced me to get a smartphone because it's the only way now that I can live financially in this world, by having to authenticate everything. I proved, and people just don't believe me, that I lived for nearly 5 years in today's society without a smartphone. People ask me, how am I so productive? When you haven't got a smartphone, it's amazing how productive you can be.
Why did you decide to not have a smartphone?
Because I didn't really need it. Okay. The only time that I was using a smartphone was before COVID. I was traveling probably 25 overseas trips a year. And so I had a smartphone to let my family know if I was running late or I'd landed safely. That's the only time I ever really used a smartphone, was to just keep in touch with the family. But I never used my smartphone for apps, for anything else, And so, and also because I was living at home, if you've got a landline at home, You don't need
Right.
a smartphone and online I can talk to people. I can still access my social media through my internet. The thing
Yeah.
about a laptop is you can't carry that around in your pocket. Whereas, of course, with a smartphone, everybody's walking around with a casino in their pocket or a whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, the point is that with a smartphone, it's mobile. You can take it everywhere, and people do spend a lot of time on it.
I mean, I use my phone all the time, but I same as you're saying, like I see people sitting around a table and they're on the phone. It's rude. I think it's rude,
Well, it is. We talk about, so I do a lot of research on what we call phubbing, so phone snubbing. So this idea that when
Yeah.
you're out socially with people is that people would rather be talking. But it's amazing. There is a real, for me, phubbing is something I notice all the time because you never see me in a social situation with a smartphone. Yet, if you take a group of typical 18-year-olds in a pub or out at a restaurant, everybody will be phubbing.
Yeah.
But in fact, to each other, there's nothing wrong with it because that's what they do.
What is the big difference between gaming addiction and gambling addiction? Is that the same
different-
or?
No, they're two completely different things. So I did my PhD way back in the mid 1980s. This is where I got into the whole addiction. I started out doing
Yeah.
gambling addiction, slot machine addiction. And I can tell you now, for me, slot machines are the crack cocaine of gambling. There are,
Oh.
so you used the word crack there. When in my gambling addiction was my first real passion. I still do lots of stuff on gambling addiction now. And the reason why gambling addiction is far more destructive than, say, gaming addictions and social media addictions is because if you spend 10 hours gambling, you're usually spending 10 hours worth of money that you probably haven't got. There's a real financial consequence to spending hours and hours gambling compared to gaming. But of course, now with gaming and buying of loot boxes and microtransactions, and even on social media, you can now, these activities have now been monetized. So when you start to monetize activities that you do excessively, that's when you tend to get more problems, is because people then typically go past their disposable income and then start, in gambling, for instance, start engaging in criminal activities or fraudulent activities to fund
Do you
their
think
habits.
the gambling on the phone? I mean, now I don't know how it is in England, but you can do sports betting on the phone, and
Yeah. So I think that in fact, in England, in the UK, we were probably the real pioneers of gambling through smartphones, particularly in what we call in-play betting now. So, traditionally, the only way you could bet, traditionally, if you did sports betting, was bet on whether a team was going to win or lose. Now you can bet on whether a team is going to win or lose, what the score is at half-time, how many penalties there will be, how many throw-ins will be, who scores the goal. Basically, on any single soccer match, in a 90-minute soccer match, there are maybe 60 to 80 different betting markets that you can continually gamble on. Now, you asked me, the difference between gambling and gaming.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue that gambling involves where you stake something of financial value on a future event. Now, that's not what happens in a typical video gaming situation. And in most video gaming situations, you don't lose money. But of course, now with the loot box buying within video games, that there is a blurring between.
what's that mean? Loot box
Yeah.
buying? I don't understand.
Oh, so sorry. So loot boxes. So now, when you're playing lots of different games, is that you can now buy. You can actually buy basically either crates or cards that you open, and by doing that, you can win a prize. When the prize might be, a particular costume for your avatar in the game.
And this is involving real money.
Yeah, so that involves real money. So I've actually argued that loot box buying within video gaming is actually a form of gambling. So that's what I mean. There is now a blurring between gambling and gaming. Now, the gambling industry always call their activities gaming. They're trying to reduce the stigma about gambling by calling it gaming. But of course, when I talk about gaming, I'm talking about video gaming, which is different from gambling. But as I say, now there's a lot of blurred lines between gambling and gaming.
Interesting.
And is loot box buying something you have to be 18 to do, or is that something?
No, and this is one of the things that I've got a big high hobby horse about this, because if it's classed as a form of gambling, then that makes it an adult activity, and you should be 18 years of age to actually be engaged in loot box buying. But loot box buying is something, I mean, most parents end up buying loot boxes for their children, so lots of children not actually using their own money. But as soon as children have got their own money or getting their pocket money, they are now buying, loot box, buying of loot boxes in video games is a very, very popular activity now for most children. And I say I've got, as a psychologist who spent 38 years studying gambling, I have real concerns about this type of monetization process within that particular video gaming situation. That basically, the higher the event frequency, the more addictive a gambling activity tends to be. But when we apply it to something like video gaming or social media use, is there in video gaming and in social media use, the rewards come thick and fast. Okay,
Right.
We have, in psychology, we talk about what's called operant conditioning. So that when you do something we really like, it's positively reinforcing and we want to do it again. Every time you get that extra like on social, on social media or Instagram, every time somebody likes, that is something that, people talk about giving you that little dopamine hit. I don't think it's simplistic as that, but it quite clearly is psychologically reinforcing. When you're playing a video game, you beat your high score, you beat your friend's high score, you get onto the next level. These are things that are rewarding and reinforcing, and these reinforcements come thick and fast. So, another way to think of addiction is that addiction equals reinforcement and rewards. The more rewards you have, the more reinforcement, the more likely that activity is to be addictive. And that's why when it comes to video gaming online, social media online, the fact that you can do these activities 24/7, 365 days a year, just shows you why some of these activities can become potentially addictive.
Well, as we're making this show, I have to say that, I'm always looking. There's so many numbers to look at. We have so many episodes,
Right. Yeah, that's true.
so many posts, so many, and I'm an adult, but I'm still checking.
I think we all do it. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
lucky. I have to be honest. When I post something on social media, and I tend to post maybe one thing a day, I'm not obsessed with seeing how many people have liked my photo or liked my paper. But I can tell you now, the typical 18-year-old, they are very competitive. They want more, they want to have more likes. They want their selfies to have more likes than the next person. That kind of competitive reinforcement thing, it keeps them online. If one of their posts hasn't got many likes, I'm going to post something else. On the few times that I do look at, if I do happen to be scrolling on my social media, I try not to do it. But it's amazing when I go on that they know what I like, because it's quite clear that it's quite clear in terms of the things that keep me online. They're very, very good at doing it. So whether it's an eating broadcast or whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's your social media feed, the algorithms have learned to basically work you out very, very quickly. And of course, those algorithms, the longer that it keeps you on, obviously from the operator's perspective, they're usually trying to sell you advertising. That's where they're making their money. My kids, when they came, they would always come to me when they were younger and say, "Dad, can I sign up for this? It's free to do it." And I had to educate my kid saying, when anything's free on the internet, it means that you are the product being sold. And I think most people, when they're online, they don't realize that nothing is for free now. When we go online to Facebook, or we go on Instagram, or we go on whatever social media site, is that of course they are profiling you to sell advertising back to you. They know within a very short amount of time what your likes and dislikes are, and so they can be very, very specific in terms of what's being sold to you. I mean, Amazon are fantastic at it now. I mean, I've been a long time Amazon user, and I say it's a necessity for me now. They've worked out, brilliantly in terms of what I like and what I'm going to spend my money on. They've spent, they've got so much real world data there to base things on, but their algorithms work, very, very well.
Well, what we mean by the internet is crack, at least to me, is that seductive ability to draw you in.
It's right there in your hand. It's right there
in your hand.
Constantly. The addiction is right here.
So, on social media, things like the like button is a structural characteristic that's designed into that product. On a video game, the skill level, the points you score, these are things that are deliberately designed into products to get you to engage in them again and again and again. Now, for some people, It doesn't matter how many. It's for me, likes don't mean a blind bit of difference to me. I'm never going to be reinforced or rewarded by a like button. But for younger people, we know that they are very reinforced and feel rewarded when they get likes in those situations. But it's always going to be a mixture between a person's individual characteristics interacting with those situational and structural characteristics. As I say, the gambling industry, the gaming industry, they like to pathologize the individual. They will say the reason you're addicted is because you've got faulty genes, you've got a defective personality. It's your expectation and beliefs are wrong. Okay, but we know is that there's lots of things that the social media industry, the video gaming industry, the gambling industry, they have responsibility for the structural characteristics and the situational characteristics, and that's why we need regulators to actually enforce how these situational and structural characteristics are used. Algorithms are a structural characteristic that you find on almost all online commercial operations now. I doubt whether they're going to ever be outlawed. So we have to educate people about what algorithms do and why algorithms are reinforcing and rewarding, and why you keep getting, what comes up on your social media feed, what comes up on your Amazon purchase, why that keeps you hooked in there.
But do you think they're going to regulate? They're going to regulate more the online space because of the structural advantages these companies, social media companies, have?
Yeah. So in the UK, our gambling commission, they do try and oversee. Things like situational characteristics of marketing, advertising. Many countries now completely banned gambling advertising. So in Italy recently, they banned gambling advertising. So quite clearly regulators can actually inhibit or stop particular situational or structural characteristics occurring. But you've always got to, usually people want evidence that this is actually something that's pernicious, or it's something that's, quite clearly causes more negative harms than it does good. But at the moment, I would say that science is very behind in lots of these things when we're looking at the addictiveness or attractiveness. And you've got to remember, there's a very fine line. I wrote a paper way back in 2002 where I said there's a very fine line between customer enhancement and customer exploitation. Okay, because when you introduce things like loyalty schemes, okay, this is a structural characteristic that companies have built into their products. They will say they're doing it to enhance your experience, but it can also be something that exploits you, gets you coming back for more. They gamify the experience. You try and build up your points to get, stay with that particular product. These are all things we don't know whether these things are ultimately good or ultimately bad until science can give us an answer to that question. And most regulators, they like to rely on empirical and scientific evidence. So at the moment, we're all kind of human guinea pigs. Whether it's algorithm, whatever, is that we're all being tested at the moment, and it will probably be down the line before regulations come in, regulating what commercial operators can do and what they can't do.
And there's so much money behind it too, with the gambling.
It all seems to be used in a amped up way on the internet. Social media, color, sound.
Without a doubt. Psychology of color. I published some papers on looking at the use of color in gambling. So my research found that people tend to gamble or gamble more quickly under red light than they do under white light. Red seems to be an arousing color. We found that in our experiments that if you manipulate the sound, so if you get high beats per minute music in the background while you're gambling, you gamble quicker. It's using every technique to try and keep people engaged in your products. If you spend multi-millions amounts of pounds developing a new game, what you don't want is that people pick up your game and then put it down 3 hours later. They want you to be playing that game for hours a day, every day for months, until the next game comes out. That's how video games are designed. They're there, but they will talk about stickiness or attractiveness rather than the word addictiveness. But they say there's a very fine line between something that's going to cause you problems and something that genuinely makes the experience more exciting for you without any problems.
Could I ask you one last question, which is on the lips of everybody, which is, how does artificial intelligence going forward work into the online space in terms of addictiveness, and we were already talking about algorithms, which I guess are a form of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so algorithms quite clear in the AI world. So AI is now used in gambling situations, but actually a lot of it is actually used for what I call social good now. So, I've worked with some gambling companies now and now using their AI technologies to actually predict who's going to become a problem gambler, so you can actually stop problems developing in the first place. But in that industry, it's the gambling regulators are actually making the companies use AI technology as a way to protect your players in terms of player protection, harm minimization, responsible gambling. I would like to see exactly those types of regulations that we find in the gambling industry applied to social media operators and applied to video game operators as well, because quite clearly these are products that, when taken to excess, can be negative.
I have actually a question I want to ask too. If you have a partner or child or anyone that you notice have this addiction, what is your advice to help them, to stop them? Because obviously it's everywhere, like around them.
Well, there's a very big difference between somebody who's genuinely addicted and somebody that may be just an habitual user. I mean,
Right.
if somebody who's genuinely addicted, then I have to say my advice, because I'm not a practitioner, is that you need to get a referral from your GP to a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist that will actually genuinely try and help you overcome that particular addiction. If you're somebody who is what I would call a more habitual user, it's about basically having strategies like, what I would call digital detox strategies. So setting time limits for yourself, giving you, literally as we probably do with your children, is that, most parents will say, well, I'm going to give children 2 hours of screen time or whatever, is applying that to yourself. There's lots of things that you can find on your smartphone now that can limit the amount of time that you spend on your digital devices. We can live without it. It's quite easy to do. So it's just, I say, if you just go online, you type in digital detox tips, there are loads of websites, including my own, that's got, whole lists of little tips you can do.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really,
Okay.
really, really interesting. And thank you for all your knowledge.
Okay. Thanks a lot, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Tune in next week when we have another great conversation about robotics, AI, and the Internet. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.